Welcome back, everyone. We hope you have taken a nap so that you can actually enjoy the debate session better. And I know debates can be energy consuming for both the participant and also the audience.
I agree with you, Mai. Listening to debaters can be as hard as becoming one. Anyways, let's get that conversation out of the way and proceed on with the motion. Now, today's motion is a little long. So, this House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should neither cooperate with nor use the data produced by medical institutions from developing countries that do not meet countries' standards on human clinical trials. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed the debate session. We will proceed on with the debate session in a short while. Thank you.
Can I know if all three speakers from side government are present? All right. Are three speakers from side opposition present?
Yes, we're here.
Is the adjudicator for the room present?
Yes, I'm present.
All right. Before we begin, can I ask the timekeeper if it's possible, at the end of each speaker, could you kindly put down their speaker times in the chat as well, so that the adjudicator can take record of them? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm pleased to welcome you once again to the third preliminary round of the 7th MyPSA National Pharmacy Debate Competition 2021. This debate will now come to order. Representing the government for today's session is the team from Taylor's 1, and representing the opposition bench will be the team from IIUM 1. It will be my responsibility as the moderator to remind you of a couple of things to keep in mind throughout this debate session. Number 1, sensitive issues that would be offensive to political, religious, or ethnicities are prohibited. Number 2, each debater has an allocated speech time of 5 minutes. The bell will be rung for the first time at the first minute, and for the second time at the fourth minute to indicate that POIs will no longer be taken. Once 5 minutes have ended, the bell will be rung twice to indicate that the allocated speech time has come to an end. Number 3, the allocated time for reply speeches are 3 minutes, with 1 minute being given beforehand for preparation. No POIs will be taken during this time. With that, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to open up the floor by inviting the Prime Minister to speak for the case of today, which is this House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should neither cooperate with nor use the data produced by medical institutions from developing countries that do not meet developed country standards on human clinical trials. With that, I invite the Prime Minister here.
All right, just a quick check. Am I audible and
Yes,
visible?
you are. Yes.
All right, so I will start in 3, 2, 1, start. Good afternoon to the respected moderator, honorable judges, cautious timekeeper, members of the opposition team, and members of the floor. I'm Ryan, the Prime Minister. Before I put forward my case today, I would like to define today's motions. This House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should neither cooperate with nor use the data produced by medical institutions from developing countries that do not meet developed country standards on human clinical trials. According to Cambridge Dictionary, developed country is defined as a country with a lot of industrial activities and where people generally have high income. And developing country is defined as a country with a little industrial and economic activities and where people generally have low incomes. And the word cooperate can be defined as the actions or process of working together to the same end, have the same goal to work together. And human clinical trial, defined by WHO, is for the purposes of registrations, a clinical trial is any research that prospectively assigns human participants or groups of humans to one or more health-related interventions to evaluate the effects on health outcomes. And then the whole motions today could be conveyed in this way. If the development countries do not meet the standards of developed countries, we won't use, we won't neither use nor cooperate with them. Vice versa, if they meet the standards, then we might cooperate and take them into considerations. Today, we as the government team strongly comply with the motions above. Ladies and gentlemen, today as a first speaker, I will be talking to you about the main issue, mainly on the safety of the data. Our second speaker will talk more about the social issue. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team test. Moving on, our first point, we need to ensure the safety of data. If the human clinical trials are fully compliant with our guidelines, then the reliability of the data can be ensured. This is a very critical point that the human clinical trial guidelines are very important. Scenario, if the development countries did not comply with our guidelines, we cannot ensure their procedures and then how they conduct the human clinical trial. And eventually, how can we ensure the safety of the data? All right. So you may ask, what is the standard on our human clinical trials? For our government side, we told you that our answer will be human clinical trials which align with WHO guidelines. Why we use WHO as our standards or guidelines? Because it is the common ground or standard applied by developed and also developing countries in the human clinical trials. we do not cooperate with the development countries unless they follows the guidelines, okay, which is WHO guidelines. Human clinical trials conducted in development countries, for example, like America. For example, let's imagine if applied in Malaysia, do you think it is 100% good news for our countries? Think about it. The answer is no. As we know, clinical trials are heavily regulated and must be conducted in accordance with standard ethical guidelines, codes of conduct, and national laws. This is to ensure the participants' safety, protections of human rights and privacy, good clinical practice, responsibility research conducts, and quality data collections. And then the data from developing country, which do not meet our series of guidelines and standards, okay, might have a risk to develop, or if you use it, it might have a risk or to proceed, you know. And then the developing country, which do not comply with the standards of developed countries. Yes, please.
Okay, so you stated that the safety of your data is your main concern. So, do you believe that these standards can also be applied in developing countries?
Yeah, the safety of the data. So, is if you really comply with what the WHO guideline, then we as the developed country, we can tap or use, or we can give you a chance to cooperate with us. So this is our main point which I want to convey, all right? And then I move on, okay? The developing countries which do not comply with the standards of developed country do not have the common needs with us to achieve the same goal, all right? So hope I answer your questions. Then what is the, I want to ask them, what is the reason for the developed country to use the data? We have a lot of choice, a variety of choice. Then why do we need to use the data from the developing countries? All right. So therefore, as a conclusions, we as the government team, okay, strongly declare that if the developing countries meet the standards on the human clinical trials, which is the standard aligned with WHO guideline and standards, we, the government, will give the chance to cooperate or use the data, or vice versa. All right. So that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition to begin the case for side opposition. Here.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon. I bid the Mr. Chair, Speaker, Honourable Adjudicator, Timekeeper, Government, Opposition, and of course, members of the House. Following the motion for today, this House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should with nor use the data produced by medical institution from developed countries that do not meet developed countries' standard on human clinical trial. Standing as the leader of opposition, we wholeheartedly disagree with this motion. With our stance, it will bring more harm than good towards both. It will be more good than harms towards both the developed countries and developed countries' medical institution. We have three reasons to believe in this basis, which are our three main points that we will surely deliver after this. But before that, I accept all the definitions given by our Prime Minister just now. Now let's deal with what the government is trying to propose. Firstly, they refuse this motion and they accept this motion because the standards of these countries do not meet in clinical trial. We believe that the problem stated by the Prime Minister just now can be solved and can be overcome. If we accept this motion, the problem that they stated just now will not be solved, and there is no urgency stated by Prime Minister on why we should accept this motion. We need to at least try to impose the same standards on developing countries so they can at least improve on human clinical trials. Done on rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen, moving on to my first argument. Cooperation with developed countries allow them to contribute their expertise, technology, and methodology to developing countries so that they can improve their standards. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem that we face according to an International Journal for Equity in Health, barriers for conducting human clinical trials in developing countries include lack of financial and human capacity, ethical and regulatory system obstacle, lack of research environment, and operational barriers. We believe that medical institutions in developed countries have the abilities and capabilities to improve the quality of human clinical trials in developing countries. When developed countries cooperate with developing countries, we introduce them with the same standards of technology, programming, advocacy, methodology, and technical support in human clinical trials. These developing countries can use and apply them to their population. Global Health article stated that the partnership between, the partnership between developed and developing countries can generate effective solution to current global health challenge, and it will benefit both parties. For example, African Partnership for Patient Safety, APPS, is a WHO program that has built patient safety partnership between hospitals in Africa and Europe. And this partnership has largely improved the quality of human clinical trials and scientific data in both sides. This clearly shows why developed countries need to cooperate and at least use the data produced from the developing countries. Last but not least, we the opposition believe it is important for this House to oppose this motion because we believe that this motion will bring more good than harm for both countries, for both developed and developing countries' medical institution. Therefore, we oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Now, to continue the case for side government, let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, I need to ensure is me audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good afternoon to moderator, timekeeper, judge, members from the opposition team, ladies and gentlemen. So our topic of our today's debate is this House believes that the medical institution from developed countries should neither cooperate or nor use the data produced by the medical institution from developing countries that do not meet developed countries' standards on human clinical trials. So before that, as the opposition has already agreed all of the definition from us, so there are some of the similarities between us. So as they accept our definition, so for the people who did not met the standards, which is called as the developing countries do not fulfill the requirement. So what's the requirement that we are actually emphasizing? We are emphasizing on WHO. We have already mentioned the reasons why we chose the WHO as the guidelines. And if the developing countries who use the WHO guidelines, it fulfills the standards by the developed countries. Okay, so let's see in this kind of similarities, what's the points that given by the opposition? Opposition says that the developing countries has the ability to provide some resources. They give some of the same standards. They give the same technical support. They give some methodology which is similar to the technologies which is fulfilled with the WHO. So, which means that it also stands to our sides because we think that if the developing countries they see for the developed countries, if they see the developing countries who already fulfill the standards, they can accept it. They can use the clinical trials that are being produced by Africa, which already obeys the rules from the WHO. So they should be taught more about if the developing countries who did not fulfill the standards. Okay.
Please.
Yes.
However, from your definition, it stated that you should neither cooperate. That means from the get-go, from the start, you cannot work with these developing countries institutions. So how can you start?
I know your questions. Thank you. Okay. I know your questions. Thank you. So in this point, we also not to cooperate with them because we didn't have the common needs with them because they didn't follow our our standard guidelines, and then what's the point we need to follow them. We need to cooperate with them. Okay, so I now will just continue with my speech. I will just continue for the points which being spoken by the first speaker. So in social aspects, we can prevent some of the risks of causing negative consequences if we follow the opposition attitudes. Why? It might be very dangerous if the developed countries are used. Before that, we need to know the background of the developing countries. Some of the developing countries even do not have the extensive research and regulatory affairs for the drugs. As some of the things are not highly regulated and not following the strict guidelines, it might cause some of the dangerous safety issue in the country. We know that as the developing countries do not follow the guidelines shall be simplified because they do not have much resources. This fulfill the definition of the developing countries. So let's look at in the history. At the 1970s, the US is still a developing country. It didn't have a lot of people involved in, they involve a lot of people in opioids, which is morphine and thalidomide. So the thalidomide is teratogenic, which caused lots of chaos and a lot of babies affected. Then US learned the lesson and it create more and more regulatory trials as the clinical trials tech are much mature and improving at this point for the developing countries and for the developed countries. So the developing countries can just follow the guidelines and then so that kind of clinical trials can be accepted by these developed countries. So this history might not be happen again. And also, other developing countries might not be suitable for the developed countries, which has their own advanced guidelines already. As we know that the clinical trials are a very extensive process. It requires a lot of resources, time, money, and energy. And some of the clinical trials are used for all the clinical trials are used for the healthy human subject. If we put some of the clinical trials in some developing countries, which do not follow the advanced guidelines, but the technology is quite good, it might cause some of the variation to the developing countries. Let's say one of the developing countries, it has their own guidelines and not following the harmonious guidelines one. There is a possibility here. The person who are actually responds quite good towards the medication at the developing countries, but responds quite bad side effects on one of the developed countries. It could say that there's some risk factors which has not been discovered by the developing countries. Hence, the developing shall use the countries shall be used the harmonized guidelines, as the harmonized guidelines have discovered these kind of risk factors. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Next, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case for their side. Hear.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good evening to member of the House. Thank you, Honorable Speaker and member of the House. I, as the Deputy Leaders of Opposition, fully support our Leader Opposition to oppose these motions today. The House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should neither cooperate with nor use the data produced by medical institutions from developing countries that do not meet developed countries' standard on human clinical trials. Before I go further, let me first refute the argument from Deputy Prime Minister. His first argument stated that it is risky to take the data from the developing countries. So I want to emphasize here, we from a developing country will produce a data that we do a research on the disease or anything. So this data can be taken for the developed country for them to do a further research. So they can learn from this data to improve their research and also the healthcare. So it is, if they're not taken the developing countries data, this will cause them not learn anything from the other developing country. So
please.
His second argument, he stated that it is not suitable for developed country to follow the data that from developing countries. So I want to state that it is not developed country to follow everything from the developed country their data. So the developed country can do a bit changes and to to improve their data for the research. So it is not. So I think these two argument is not it's not strong enough. So I proceed to my first argument, which is to decrease the gap of quality healthcare between developing countries and developed countries. For your information, developing countries are already left behind in their healthcare sector. There are 152 developing countries and 66 developed countries in the world. This data shows developing countries are 2 times the number of developed countries. If this motion is accepted by the House, the number of developing countries will remain there and unable to grow their healthcare and become a developed countries. Member of the House, this situation will hinder the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations in a good health and well-being, and also the partnership for the goals. These goals are for a universal purpose in which all countries in the world need to cooperate to achieve the goal, which is the goal of good health and well-being. So I give the example like in the situation of COVID-19, if developed countries do not accept the data from developing countries, so this will make the pandemic COVID-19 unable to be solved and end. So I proceed to my. So it is very important for the House to oppose this motion due to my first argument to decrease the gap of quality healthcare between developing countries and developed countries. I proceed to my second argument, which is to increase the academic research data, to improve the academic research data for developed countries. As you know, the institution in developed countries will face the lack of important data for your information. Institution in developed countries will face a lack of data on developing countries for their research purpose, thus hindering any progress in further research in this geographic pool, and will cause the loss of the will cause in the academic loss of their part. So, okay. Developed countries need data from the developing country to do further research in their clinical trial. So, this data will be important for developed countries to improve their academic research purpose and also the quality, efficacy, and safety of the drug produced and marketed in this country. Hence, quality drug and healthcare service cannot be supplied to this population due to lack data on these populations. I give you an example. During a pandemic COVID-19, developed countries need data from a developing country to study on the new variant, like variant data that come from developing country, which is India. And this data is important for developed countries to improve their
please.
With the COVID-19 vaccines. So this give a less credible research result for this version and hence loss of them internet quality healthcare. So I, as a oppositions, oppose these motions with my second argument to increase academic research data for developed countries. That's all from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for your speech. Now we would like to invite the government whip to respond to the case brought by the opposition. Hear.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, okay. A very good afternoon to the Honourable Adjudicator, esteemed timekeeper, members of the opposition team, and my fellow teammates. The motion for today's debate is, this House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should neither cooperate with nor use the data produced by medical institutions from developing countries that do not meet developed country standards on human clinical trials, and we as the government team strongly and wholeheartedly agree with this motion. First and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind everyone that we on the government team here are not against using the data and are not against cooperation between countries. However, a certain standard needs to be met beforehand, before any of this liaising of cooperation or usage of data can occur. So that's something I would like to emphasize on first. All right, so I'll move on by first rebutting the first speaker of the opposition team. So she didn't really rebut my speaker on how it's risky and not safe for us to use for developed countries to use data from developing countries that did not meet the standards of human clinical trials. She just went on to say that this problem can be solved and overcome if the developing countries first improve their standards, and she emphasized that this motion actually brings more good than harm if that's what her stance is.
Your eye, please.
Yes, please, yes.
I would like to I'm sorry, I would like to correct her. It brings more harm than good. That is our stance.
All right, okay, sorry, maybe it's a slip of my tongue or her tongue or something like that. So firstly, I would like to say that again, we are not stopping any form of cooperation, but we agree that a certain standard needs to be met first. And the reason why we are so reluctant to allow this usage of data between countries that have not met the standards yet is because this data did not comply to any of the either ethical guidelines, safety precautions, human rights of privacy by the subjects who were used in those human clinical trials. So therefore, if you were to use that data to countries that use that data and generalize it to the population of another country, that is so wrong and unsafe, because if that drug worked in that country, it wouldn't be that drug would work in this country. And I understand that your definition of use might not be thoroughly using that data and applying it to the whole population. But even if you were to refer to that data and continue research on that data, it's not valid, it's not reliable, because the guidelines for their human clinical trial did not meet the standard of your human clinical trial guidelines. So there is no reason for you to insist on using that data when there are other options out there. Developed countries have so many options out there, and they do not need to risk the lives of their own population in order to form this bond between developing countries. Okay, so their first point for the government team was that developing countries are lacking in many areas, and they can improve by cooperating with developed countries. First of all, we agree that there's a lot of room for improvement in developing countries. But if your goal is to improve your country's medical sector, then you must first ensure that your own standard of human clinical trials meet the needs of the other country that you plan on cooperating with. You cannot insist that that country has to receive your data and cooperate with you just because you want to improve your own medical sector. So that is my rebuttal. So now moving on to the second speaker. He said his rebuttal for our point where we said that it's risky. He said that the developing countries' data that they can produce can be useful for the developed countries. So firstly, I want to and he also mentioned that it's not an obligation for the developed countries to use the entire data to be applied to the entire population. And they can just use it to enhance their research. So first of all, I want to say that this data is almost close to useless if you're not meeting a certain standard of human clinical trials. Because like I mentioned earlier, if you do not have a common ground, if you don't have common needs, like what my first and second speaker said, then the data cannot be applied. The data cannot be useful to that country. Okay, so moving on to their second point, they said that the number of developing countries will not change and they cannot grow. So basically, if your goal or aim is to come out of that box of being a developing country and improve and become a developed country, then you must first ensure your standards are met. Their next point was that you can improve academic research data. So how sure are you that countries are so desperate for the developing countries' data? And we are not saying that they cannot form cooperations and use of data, but the standard needs to be there. You cannot force a bond without ensuring a standard is there. So with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we would like to invite the opposition whip to present their speech. Hear, hear.
A few seconds, please. I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening. I bid to the honorable moderator, wise educator, members of the government, my friends from the opposition, and of course, members of this house. So today's debate is titled, "This House believes that medical institutions from developed countries should neither cooperate with nor use the data produced by medical institutions from developing countries that do not meet developed country standards on human clinical trials." I believe that even after this debate is over, the motion will fall from our due to our arguments today. So before we move on, I would like to make a few rebuttals from the opposition side. Okay, so the first, the Prime Minister has stated that one of their concerns is the safety of data. Okay, one their concerns is the safety of data, which is I believe it is a very valid concern. However, it should be noted what is the root cause of making this data unsafe, which is they are not getting their standards up there with the developed countries. And why does their standards are not up there with the developed countries? Because they are unable to get the methodologies and technicalities from the developed countries. And by this motion, it is stating that developed countries should not cooperate with these developing countries. So how can we ensure that the safety of the data from these developing countries that do not meet these standards can be met in the future if they do not cooperate in the first place? Therefore, that is why my main concern when they said safety of data. If they do not cooperate in the first place, then how can they ensure safety in the future if they cannot cooperate? So okay, so moving on to the the Deputy Prime Minister. So one of the issues is the social issues, which is social issues, I believe. So I believe the clear term is that it will be a financial burden for countries to cooperate and use data used by these developing countries. However, I should remind you that developed countries, they are called developed countries for one reason. They are high income countries, and they are able to use their revenue to do research in developing countries. And it should be reminded that doing research in developing countries is also important in the academic field. So by denying the opportunity to cooperate and use data from developing countries that do not meet their standards, how can we ensure improvements to how can we make research to make improvements in these countries in the future, and thus overcoming the problems that the government today has spoken of, which is safety of data by these countries. Therefore, we believe that if they are that worried, we believe that they should make a cooperation with the developing countries, even though they do not meet their standards, because we believe that no, thank you. Let me continue. Because we believe that they can apply these standards. These developing countries can use these standards. And thirdly, I believe that the government is doing a generalization in which developing countries are countries that are so backward, they are autocratic countries, or having very poor regulation. That is a very poor generalization made by the government, because there are so many developing countries that are meeting those standards that are not as such described by the government today. So even though they are not meeting those standards, so yeah, it is a very ugly generalization made by the governments, and I believe that their end goal is that to ensure that the standards of developing countries is up there with the developed countries. However, if they are withholding, if they do not want to cooperate in the first place, how can this goal can be achieved by the government? So therefore, I believe the time is up. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So moving on to the summarization of my team's case. So we will our first point is that cooperation with these countries allow them to contribute developed countries to their expertise, technology, and methodology to developing countries, so that they can improve their standards, which is to improve their standards. Second, we believe that it is important to decrease the gap of quality healthcare between developing countries and developed countries, and this cannot be achieved if this motion stands today. And thirdly, increase that academic research data developed. I'm sorry. institutions in developed countries will lack important data on developing countries for research purposes, thus hindering any progress in further research in this geographic pool. It will be an academic loss on their part. Therefore, we believe that after this debate finish, the motion will fall. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the substantive part of this debate. Now, teams will be given 1 minute to prepare for the reply speeches. Now, I'd like to invite the reply speaker from side opposition to present their speech. Here.
Today, in my reply speech, I will summarize both of our sides' cases, and I will draw to you the differences between our two cases. Let's cut to the chase. What exactly is it that the government is trying to propose today? First, they say that the standards of these countries, of these developing and developed countries, do not meet. And then they say that it is dangerous to apply the methodology of developed countries to developing countries. And also they say that it is not suitable to apply the technology in developed countries to developing countries. Just like what stated by my second speaker just now, we do not want to comprehensively or fully impose the guidelines of developed countries to developing countries. We should do it gradually, little by little, so that one day we can together achieve the same standards in human clinical trial. This motion is also about cooperation, which means partnership. So it will benefit two sides of the party, not just benefiting one side of the party. We believe that the problems that was stated by the government just now are not urgent, can be solved, and we can overcome all those problems. If we accept this motion, the problem that they stated just now will not be solved, and until when the developing countries will rely on developed countries for research purposes. We need to at least try to impose the same standards on developing countries, so that they can at least improve their research on human clinical trials. On our opposition side, first we discuss about the abilities and capabilities that these developed countries can contribute to developing countries so that they can improve their standard in clinical trial. Then we discuss about decreasing the gap of healthcare system between these two countries, and we also think this cooperation between these two countries will increase the quality of academic research data, especially in this COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, I oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker from side opposition. And now I'd like to invite the reply speaker from side government to conclude this debate. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Here comes to my reply speech. So before that, I could comment that this is a messy debate because the two teams are actually say the same similar advantages. At first, we need to differentiate what the two teams are really saying. We agree that some of the developing countries are using the guidelines which set by the WHO, and this WHO is like a generalized guidelines which agreed by the developing countries and also the developed countries. So the WHO, we agreed to use it as a advanced guidelines. Okay. Before that, I actually excited to see if the opposition can fulfill the two questions or not. The first one is actually like why the developing countries are not wish to fulfill the requirements set by the WHO, which is from the developed countries. Two, if we make the harmonization, if improving the standards, why not try to go for a direction which will used by the developed countries for the developing countries? So we can see that at these two kind of questions, actually the opposition didn't really answer towards it. So this will be the chaos. It will be really hard to be discussed in further. Let's see what's the problem which faced by the opposition. At first, the opposition says that no collaboration, no talk. Yes, I think they are really denied for the needs for the developed countries. Okay, yes, you can for the developing countries, they can go for improving their guidelines to like fulfill their developed countries, because the developed countries, they do not have the commitment to let the developing countries to be good. Okay, at first you need to let them to know that, or you are want to improving you are want to develop these kind of things. At first you want to have a same goals with the developed countries to have the common goal. Okay, the second one is if the developing countries who really don't want to follow the guidelines, do you think the developed countries would need to like listen your things to follow your guidelines? Because your guidelines is actually not that satisfied by the developed countries. Why did they want to accept your guidelines and apply to their things? Okay, so we can see that what did the developed countries can do? They actually if they want to do it, they can collaborate with other developed countries to like find a better solution towards it. If it is the last resort, we also don't want to use the guidelines which is set by the developing countries, because we already tell you that there's a lot of risk that might be happen, which will cause the disaster towards the developed countries. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have reached the end of this debate session. We hope you had an excellent time watching the speakers, and we'd also like to sincerely thank you for tuning in. The results as well as the feedback will be announced shortly, so please stay tuned. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Welcome back, everyone. It is a pleasure to see everyone again. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's dinner time. But wait, sorry to burst your bubble. We have one last session for the day before we proceed on with the dinner.
As much as we would like to commentate, your hunger is our priority. Therefore, let us move on to the last sessions of the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, this house will not cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly in countries with public healthcare. We hope you enjoy the debate session, everyone. We'll proceed on with the debate session in a short while. Thank you, everyone.
Recording in progress.
Before we begin, can I know if all three speakers from side government are present?
Yes.
All right. Are all three speakers from side opposition present?
Yes.
And is the adjudicator for the room present?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm pleased to welcome you to the third preliminary round of the 7th MyPSA National Pharmacy Debate Competition 2021. This debate will now come to order. Representing the government side for today's session is the team from Taylor's 2, and representing the opposition bench will be the team from QIU 2. It will be my responsibility as moderator to remind you of a couple of things to keep in mind throughout this debate session. Number one, sensitive issues that would be offensive to political, religious, or ethnicities are prohibited. Number two, each debater has an allocated speech time of 5 minutes. The bell will be rung for the first time at the first minute and for the second time at the fourth minute to indicate that POIs would no longer be accepted. Once 5 minutes have passed, the bell will be rung again to indicate that the allocated speech time has come to an end. Number 3, the allocated time for reply speeches are 5 minutes, with 1 minute being given for preparation during this time. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to open up the debate for today by inviting the Prime Minister to open up the case for side government on the motion: in countries with public healthcare, this House would not cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly. Prime Minister, hear.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Okay. A very good morning to the honorable adjudicators, cautious timekeepers, member of the opposition team, and my fellow teammates. My name is Fong Yi-Zi, and I am your Prime Minister for this debate. Today's motion states that in countries with public healthcare, this House would not cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly. We, as the government, believe this motion must stand. Before I explain why, allow me to define today's motion and then set up a scope for this debate. Firstly, public healthcare is defined as the public health systems are commonly. Public healthcare is defined as all public and voluntary entities that contribute to the delivery of essential public health services within a jurisdiction. Next, not covered is defined as the payments and charges of the treatment being handled by the government, other organizations, or not the individuals in need of treatment. Lastly, life-prolonging procedures mean any medical procedures, treatment, or intervention which 1. Utilizes mechanical or other artificial means to sustain, restore, or supplant a spontaneous vital function, or is otherwise of such a nature as to afford a patient no reasonable expectation of recovery from a terminal condition. And 2, when applied to a patient in a terminal condition, would serve only to prolong the dying process. The term includes artificially administered hydration and nutrition. However, nothing in this act shall prohibit the administration of medication or performance of any medical procedures deemed necessary to provide comfort care or to alleviate pain, but that excludes life-prolonging treatments because that we will bring more pain for the patient and not alleviate it. Also, elderly is defined as people who are usually more than 60 or 65 years of age. We today, as the government team, will tell you why this motion should stand with 3 points. I, as the Prime Minister, will be talking about how life-prolonging treatments affect life. The Deputy Prime Minister will talk about the financial burdens on the government. Our third Minister will rebut the opposition team and sum up our team's case, as well as the reply speech to conclude everything. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will start my argument. As science continues to refine and develop life-saving technologies, questions remain as to how much medical effort and financial resources should be expended to prolong lives of elderly patients suspended between life and death. At what point should death be considered irreversible? What criteria should be used to determine when to withhold or withdraw life-prolonging treatments in cases of severe brain damage and terminal illnesses? Life-prolonging treatments may be used when it is expected that you will recover and the treatment would therefore be temporary. However, there are also situations where recovery does not or cannot occur, and then the treatment would be necessary for the rest of your life, such as breathing machine or kidney machine. Also, have you thought of the potential burdens of treatment? The burdens of treatment include more pain and suffering, distress, the possible need to be in a hospital or have regular medical appointments, and the possibility of prolonging the dying process. Let me give you an example. No, please. Let me give you an example. Elderly are already people who have lived their lives or are suffering from diseases that have very low rate of recovery, such as diabetes. You can't provide dialysis for all elderly people with diabetes. This is because the life expectancy for patients in maintenance dialysis, according to the US RDS report, is
6.5 years for patients aged 60 to 64, a time expectancy that is shorter than most of the malignancies. So, to emphasize, is it worth it? Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your speech. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition to begin the case for side opposition. Hear, hear.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. A very good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable educators, respected government team, members from the floor, and my loyal teammates. This is the opposition leader of the House, and in countries with public health care, this House would cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly. I, as the opposition leader, will be talking on the individual level regarding this motion. Our second speaker will be talking on the societal level on this motion, whereas our third speaker will rebut all the points made by the government team. Now, I would like to rebut on a point that is mentioned by the Prime Minister. So, the Prime Minister has mentioned that life-prolonging treatments are just increasing pain and burden to the patients, especially elderly. So, in this case, when we talk about pain and burden, how do we define it? What is the level of the pain? Like, as we know that dialysis, it does not cause any pain to the patient when it is actually done correctly by the medical team. And so far as for the diabetes patient, are we saying that we are denying this life-prolonging treatment to them and let them die because of pain from diabetes? But diabetes is a controllable disease which is easily manageable, managed by the medication. So how are this disease causing pain and burden to the patient when it's actually easily managed by medications? So therefore, I would now coming to my first point of my argument, which is we should provide equal rights between all citizens in the country, as it is within the rights of the citizens to obtain treatments at the time when they are needed the most. As we all know, the aging community under retirement are still contributing to the tax payment in the country, or even when they are at their previous working years, they have contributed to the tax payments, and as well, hence, is it fair for us to deny this public health care on the life-prolonging treatments when they are needed the most at their point of life? And after years of contributions to the country economic development, and right now, it's time for them to receive the care that they needed the most in the public health care. Is it the right choice to deny their rights towards life-prolonging treatments? The answer is definitely a no. Take, for instance, in our country, Malaysia, even the rights of older persons stipulated in the federal constitution enshrined under Article 8 states that all persons are equal before the law and entitled to the equal protection of the law. And hence, by denying life-prolonging treatments in public health care, only proves that the country is encouraging rights inequality between all taxpayers in the country. And all individuals, despite their age, and are currently working, are taxed according to their income every year. And we cannot deny that there are aging communities in the country who are still working and still contributing to the countries. And they are taxed too. And ladies and gentlemen, according to the STAR, there are approximately 3.5 million elderly in this country, and a significant proportion of them are still employed. And one of the reasons they are still employed is that they have no pensions and depend on EPF, which is known as Employees Provident Fund savings. And according to the STAR, about 50% of those who have contribute to EPF do not have enough savings to last for their remaining years. And that is why up until now they are still working. And unfortunately, they might not be from the upper class T20 who are assumed to be able to afford on life-prolonging treatments from private healthcare. And ladies and gentlemen, just for your information, T20 is the upper class that we have classified based on their income, based on the Malaysian income system. And hence, for this group of community who are still working and contributing to the country, they should be given the equal rights in the public health to procure any treatments required. And let me stress on the rights equality again, where all residents of the country, despite their age, should be eligible to obtain treatments required. And adding to my argument, even the Hippocratic Oath states that practice two things in your dealings with disease, either help or do no harm to the patients. And hence, all patients in need of be emergency or even life-prolonging treatments, all medical providers in all sectors, including public and private healthcare, should provide the right treatment with no harm intended despite their age, financial status, or race. And by denying healthcare to elderly, especially to those who are not financially capable and are unable to afford treatments from the private healthcare sector, is going against the Hippocratic Oath itself. Ladies and gentlemen, we will become an elderly one day. Ask yourself this question: do you want to be taken care of by your government when you are the one needing this life-prolonging treatment? Do you want this policy to be passed? I can answer that. That we, the opposition, do not want this to happen to the society, to our own citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for your speech. Now, to continue this debate, let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
A very good morning to the honorable adjudicators, precise timekeepers, members of the opposition team, and my fellow teammates. I am going to be proving to you that even if you can see through the opposition's framework of providing life-prolonging treatments, we, the government, are still better. But first, let me rebut the opposition's points. According to an article, elderly patients who are on dialysis seem to have a higher burden on age-related problems or geriatric syndromes such as frailty, falls, and cognitive impairment. There is also emerging evidence that dialysis initiation may be associated with accelerated rates of functional or cognitive decline. Moving on, current population in this country is 32,870,544 people in this country. And according to the opposition, the elderly population is just 3.5 million. So I think it's clear if you weigh out which is more significant, right? The 3.5 million or the rest, right? So if you're going to spend so much on the elderly only, what about the rest? Yes, they are humans and they do deserve to live. We're not arguing with that. In fact, we do agree with that. The government has still provided public healthcare to the elderly. They have choices. We are not stripping away their entitledness of getting the treatment. All we are doing right now is removing the guaranteed choice of life-prolonging treatment to the elderly that has a low chance of recovery. Without this extra burden that the government needs to fund on top of already funding public healthcare like the government hospitals, the government can use these funds for other things like funding for medical innovation, investing in AI in the medical sector, and investing in researchers. How about other sectors that needs this fund at the same time? The government can't and will not put all their money for the elderly only and neglect other sectors. If they do so, the government will definitely go bankrupt and the economy will collapse in this country at this instant. This leads me to my very first point, the financial burden on the government. Financially speaking, using prolonging health treatments can be very costly and it's not a one-time thing. It has to be used continuously until the illness improves, which is not guaranteed. And in cases with elderly people, their recovery rate, once again, is very low. So it will take a longer time to recover. The longer the time, the more resources extracted and the more money taken out from the government. The federal government spent nearly 1.2 trillion in a year 2019. And the population is increasing day by day. So can you imagine how much the government has to spend right now in the year 2021? Elderly people also have a low immune system, which makes their recovery rate slower. And this might expect more resources to be extracted for them to heal, which probably might only increase their lifespan to 4 to 5 years. Let me introduce this term, immunosenescence, which is defined as the changes in the immune system associated with age. This immunosenescence starts to affect people's health at about the age of 60 and above, said by Janet Lord at the University of Birmingham, UK. And this is science, and this is backed up by science and facts. Bringing me back to my point, why should the government invest so much in the elderly people only when their recovery rates are so low and their immune systems are deteriorating? So as we can see, this is a losing game as there is no guarantee of their recovery rates. The government can't afford providing life-prolonging treatments because providing life-prolonging treatments are actually only affecting the country's growth in a whole. Rejected, sorry. This is because in the name of providing life-prolonging treatments, you cannot just invest all the money into healthcare and neglect, rejected. You cannot just invest all the money into healthcare and neglect the other aspects when it comes to economy. When we say elderly here, we are referring to the people who are really, really old and around the age of 60. People from this category come with a low recovery rate. By providing them consistent life-prolonging treatments, you are only investing on someone who has a low rate of recovery and a life expectancy of 5 years with treatment. When in return, you can invest on someone who has a higher rate of recovery and longer life expectancy. When we bring public healthcare into reality, we cannot just make that our only scope and neglect other sectors that is equally as significant or probably more significant to the people. No, we are not saying that elderly lives are not important or significant. All we are saying is that being in their position towards the ending stage of their life, they don't have the willpower and they are not in the right state of mind to even have the ability to recover properly. We have to be realistic here. We have to compare and see who has a higher chance of recovering and who has a longer life expectancy. For instance, let me give you a prime example. During this COVID-19 outbreak, many people have been struggling with their respiratory system, and this had caused hospitals to maximize their usage of breathing machines to help these people breathe. And the majority struggle with breathing, right? As we all know, the hospitals were packed with many patients that required aid to help to breathe. Due to this, not only our country, but countries worldwide were not able to obtain breathing facilities. Hence, they had to prioritize the younger people because their recovery rate were higher than the elderly people despite being given the aid to breathe. So if you were in the government situation where you can help someone live a longer life or live a shorter life, who would you choose? Hence, why this house would not provide life-prolonging treatments to the elderly people. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Now, I would like to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to present their speech. Here.
Is my mic working?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. All right. Good evening to my fellow judges and the timekeeper, as well to the government. And we as a team of opposition, we would like to state our reason why that in the public healthcare, the House should cover the life-prolonging treatment to the elderly. But before I get to my points, there are certain things I want to rebut or perhaps bring light to our argument today, which that we and the government and the opposition do agree that this is not only a healthcare issue, it's also an economical issue, that we are right now arguing how the elderly is impacting on our national economy. But here is where we differ apart. The government has implied that the elderly has a negative impact on our national economy, but we as opposition believe they have brought more benefit than harm to our national economical health. So this leads to my second point. Okay, and let's get into the crux of the problem here. Okay, we're talking about public health care. Okay, by denying public health care of a life-prolonging treatments, we only push the elderly to our alternative. Okay, and an alternative, it only seeks to only damage their financial security, right? And their alternative is to get the life-prolonging treatment in the private sector. And the private sector, the cost is very expensive. Okay, the poor elderly patient could not afford the life-prolonging treatment, and only by passing this motion, you only seek to punish the poor elderly people and only rewards the rich. Okay, this only seeks a certain group of people from receive a proper health care from groups who could afford, rather than the groups who could afford the public health care in the private sector. Hence, the bottom 40 and the middle 40 groups are the most vulnerable people in this group if the policy has passed. Therefore, I have found out the conclusion is that the government has implied that the elderly groups are a lost cause and only serve as a liability to our national economy and our national budget. And here I disapprove that notion and I challenge it. And I believe that elderly plays a major role in our economy. Okay, let's take, for example, what the elderly do. They have, as stated from my first speaker, is that the elderly are not freeloaders. Okay, they have jobs, they have businesses, they have their own companies, all right? And by denying this health service to the elderly, it only seeks to decline the national productivity and purchasing power as our elderly patients are slowly dying out in our economy. So let me bring to my first point, the productivity sector. Okay, we see that the elderly possess a very valuable knowledge and experience in teaching the younger workforce according to their specialized skills. Often not, if we look around our Malaysian landscape, we often see those skills in our agricultural business as well as our food and beverage sector. Who here has eaten in a food court before? Have you ever seen a young generation cook a nasi lemak or a mee goreng? No, often not. This job has been contributed by the elderly group of people. Okay. Not only that, we also do see that the elderly also contributes to the agriculture farm as well. Those are the ones that we don't see or use today. If you do not take Malaysia as an example, I can give you a second example. For example, Japan. Despite having the largest elderly population in the world, it still contributes to the Japan economy. For example, the sushi crafting process. Okay, the sushi making process is a very, very vulnerable and a very employable and of course rare skill that have to take decades, if not years, to master its craft. Without the elderly group, the culinary art skill would be lost forever. All right, and therefore, we really can see here that the elderly groups are so valuable that the Japanese government has extended their retirement age from 65 years old to 70 years old. So even if we see this, the policy has proven, we do see that the Japanese government see that the Japanese elderly has value. Moreover, they also have purchasing power that helps improve our local economy by promoting cash circulation. That means they help the small and medium economy to succeed and avoid business shutdowns. Each goods has GSTs, so it means that if more goods are being sold, more tax revenue can be generated to the government in order to set up more infrastructure and education for the future generation. And the absence of this prolonged treatment not only threatens the cash circulation in our economy, but ironically enough, it also will threaten the food security in Malaysia. And therefore, we as an opposition stand by our value and our firm belief that we as a Malaysian should support the elderly in the private sector. Thank you. I mean, public sector.
Thank you for your speech. Now, we would like to invite the government whip to respond to the case brought up by the opposition. Hear, hear.
Hello, sorry for coming up late. Okay. Sorry, yeah. Okay. Okay. A very good morning to the honorable educators, precise team, timekeeper, members of the opposition team, and my fellow teammates. So the opposition leader has brought up the point, pain and burden cannot be caused by dialysis and diabetes treatment. I would like to differ. As my DPM has said, dialysis causes some patients may have a drop in their blood pressure that could lead to nausea, vomiting, headache, or cramps. Diabetes patients have to go through the other hand of immense weight gain or weight loss. Do you think that's not pain? And then the OL also stated that those significant percentage of elderly paying taxes are people who are healthy enough to work. I don't think people who are in need of life-prolonging treatment are capable of working on the measure of paying high sum of taxes. The percentage of elderly who are paying high sum of taxes are the T20 that you have been stating. Do you think it's fair for people who are able to afford to pay for their treatment to cover for people who don't? And sorry, I don't think the OL got the motion right at the end. They said that we are going against healthcare being provided to elderly. No, we as government agree on healthcare facilities which does not include life prolonging treatment to be provided for the elderly. Only the life prolonging treatment is not being covered by the public healthcare, not the whole public healthcare not being covered. It's an exception only. And the opposition deputy leader has stated they will have to get life prolonging treatment in the private sector, right? Which is not true. Elderly could still get their life prolonging treatment in the government hospital by paying for it. The cost of life prolonging treatment in government hospital is significantly lower than private hospitals. Just that the public healthcare will not be covering for it. They could pay for that. And I have actually seen younger people flooding the food court and taking away the local food industry. I'm not sure which restaurants in Malaysia the DPM has went to, because most food industry is covered by young Malaysians and not older people in Malaysia. Yes, you can see cafes and food courts around. So another point that DPM has brought is that just because Japanese has allowed elderly sushi chefs to extend their retirement, we should provide elderly all over the world to get life prolonging treatment, which I don't think is apt, but I guess that's his point. But certain treatments can be life-saving and can bring a person back to their previous level of function and independence. However, life-prolonging treatments can also be harsh, especially for poor people who are already in poor health. Some intense treatments, when used for people who are seriously ill, can cause inconvenience, pain, and suffering, which my PM has stated. As my PM also said, would have just have to suffer for a prolonged period through this treatment. They are unable to live their last bit of life in peace, rather having to continuously go through this painful treatment instead of living their life. And very elderly patients are being admitted to life-prolonging treatment in increasing numbers. Most concerning is that this admission may occur despite the preferences of many elderly patients to avoid unnecessary prolongation of life. By sustaining therapy in spite of this, more than 70% of seriously hospitalized elderly people do not discuss with the healthcare providers, which may result into them if they don't want to. And I don't think they have this choice when they are in a situation like that. And in Malaysia's demographic change is a real concern because it is progressing at a much faster pace than that of many countries. By 2020, those aged 65 and above will present 7% of the population. And by 2045, Malaysia will become an aged nation, and when 14% of its population are aged by 65 and above. The immediate impact that policymakers will be concerned with is the potential increase in government spending on healthcare. Those in retirement pay less income tax since they are not working. The combination of higher government spending, lower tax revenue will lead to their higher deficit. An aging population might also translate into higher cost of living for everyone. When there's lower supply of workers, wages are pushed up. Wages sound good, but in the long higher and higher. With this detrimental aging population in Malaysia, providing life-prolonging treatments for elderly for free will only make Malaysia's economy face a big threat. When this treatment costs so much towards the government funds or the public healthcare, for the public healthcare, this concludes why this House would not cover lifelong prolonging treatment to the elderly. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we would like to invite the opposition whip to present their speech. Here.
Am I audible, Mr. Chairperson?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairperson. A very good evening. I would like to wish to everyone present here today on this lovely day. The motion being debated today is, in countries with public healthcare, this House would not cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly, and we, the opposition, do not agree with the motion being debated today. Firstly, I, as the third speaker, I will rebut all of the points from the government. Let us first have a look at what the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the Third Minister has mentioned repeatedly, which is on the pain and suffering suffered by those elderly patients who have severe diseases and conditions and so on. Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, from the government side, let us first take a look at what is the motion we are debating today. The motion we are debating today is whether the public healthcare in countries which are offering it, should they cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly, or they should not cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly. We are not debating whether these elderly patients, because they are having this pain and suffering, we should give them this choice or we should not give them this choice. As a government, we should provide to everyone that we will allow you to get treatment. But at the end, it is your choice. If you would not like to have the suffering, pain, and so on, it is ultimately your choice as a patient. You have the freedom of choice, right? So why are we debating on that and we are not focusing on the motion being debated today? The motion being debated today is whether in public healthcare, we should cover life-prolonging treatments to the elderly or not. It is not a matter of whether the patient is having this, having that, suffering this, suffering pain and that. Who are we to decide whether the patient is having low willpower or more willpower, they would like to survive or they would not like to survive? As the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister has mentioned, that their survival rate is lower and their willpower is low to survive. How do we know if their willpower is low to survive or not? Who is the government to decide that? It is always the choice of the patient if they would like to survive or not. Yes or not? Definitely, you know the answer to it. And now let's look at what the Prime Minister has mentioned. The Prime Minister has mentioned about financial burden as well, together with the Deputy Prime Minister. Allow me to educate the fellow government members on the statistics. I heard them mentioning that the federal budget is 1.3 trillion. I'm not sure where this number came from and which statistics is it. The Malaysian national budget, federal budget for 2021 is only 322.5 billion Malaysian ringgit. And the Ministry of Health's total budget is 31.9 billion ringgit. And it's not even 10% out of our total budget. And Malaysia's second quarter 2021 GDP grows by 16.1% based on Bank Negara Malaysia and Department of Statistics Malaysia. And why would the government would like to state that the financial burden is so high that your GDP has grown by 16.1%, but you could not even cover that 10% health budget which you have allocated, and out of that 10% of your entire budget, there's just a fraction which is being spent on life-prolonging treatment. So I do not understand what is the logic behind the financial burden and this. A statistic clearly shows, and this is Bank Negara Malaysia and Department of Statistics Malaysia showing that we can still afford it being a developing country. And another statement which does not make sense at all is that how the government would like to go against the federal constitution in depriving every citizen of their fundamental right for healthcare, and these elderly citizens who have contributed to our nation, and we would like to not support them at their elderly age by not prolonging their treatments. Is this right? Definitely no. And the Prime Minister has also mentioned that how do we conclude if there are low chances of survival at such a senior age? If the chance of survival is low, why should we support them? And why should we focus our financial resources on this elderly population, which should spend them elsewhere? Where I believe that the government is running away from the root cause to this. The root cause to this is not having a proper healthcare system in place to cover these elderly people. Well, the government should be focusing on how to improve the healthcare system for every citizen. The government is for everyone. The government is for the people. It's not only for the younger generation and not for the older generation. It's like the government is trying to say that the people who are living longer, those who are in the elderly category, they are not important. The fact that people live longer than ever should be celebrated as one of the biggest success stories in history. Let's take an example of our neighboring country, Singapore. Singapore takes care of the elderly very well. And compared to a developed country like Canada, Canada also prioritizes the elderly generation. Elderly people are also important. And how do these elderly people contribute to society? Like any younger person, they shop, they use services which employ people, and they pay taxes. And based on what the third minister has mentioned on them agreeing that they are also workers, cooking and so on, but most of them are younger generation. So indirectly, you're supporting that older generation are also working, paying taxes. So why are we depriving of their rights? When they have the will to survive, we should give them the chance. And especially those who would not be able to afford private healthcare when public healthcare is not available as an option. And this is why we, the opposition, truly believe with the 3 points from our side on equal rights and also not to victimize the poor elderly people, and also on the country's productivity being lowered if this motion is to be true. And this is why we believe that based on these grounds, the case presented by the government is not strong, and we, the opposition, would like to propose that the motion being debated today to be disagreed on and not true. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. And with that, we have now come to the end of the substantive part of this debate. Now teams will have 1 minute to prepare for the reply speeches. Now, I'd like to invite the replies to present their speech.
Is my mic working?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Good evening to the fellow judges and to the government side. And we as opposition, we would like to give out a reply speech about the reason why we choose to deny the motion and argue that we should cover the lipoprotein treatment in the public healthcare to the elderly. First of all, is that, as I stated from the leader of the opposition, denying healthcare to the public health, denying life-prolonging treatment in public healthcare to the elderly goes against a Hippocratic oath. That we as a healthcare provider should not be ignored because we have carried out this oath in order to make sure that we should not cause any harm and also allow the patients to make this decision for themselves. We firmly believe that healthcare is not a luxury, but an obligation from the government to provide the taxpayers after years of toiling and making ends meet while fulfilling their side of obligation to the government. By denying this life prolonging treatment, it only seeks to show as a form of betrayal to the social contract that has been set up by the government and its people after years of coexisting. This is not a debate. This motion only seeks to create inequality, not only between the young and the elderly, but as well as the poor and the rich. And if we were to argue on the side of the government, if their argument is that we needed to conserve our resources, might I just provide an alternative? Shouldn't it be more flexible or more realistic if we make it optional for the elderly patient to pick up and reject the life prolonging treatment on their own? After all, we as a healthcare provider, we also need to support the patient choices in order to take part in their health decisions rather than we making the decisions for them. And of course, like bringing up from my third speaker, the younger generation will soon to be elder generation in the future. The same motion that's passed on today only seeks to destroy us as well. It is a vicious cycle and it should not be going on. And moreover, there is nothing that the government has warranted the use of the nuclear option to outright ban the life-prolonging treatment in the public healthcare. Well, there are so many less dangerous alternatives that is already available to you. So we as an opposition team, we would like to propose an alternative treatment model that comprises the criteria where we should promote patient understanding of his or her and the medical situation resources required for the treatment rather than outright blocking them. And of course, by doing so, we also bring transparency between the government and the people as well. Thank you.
Thank you to the reply speaker from side opposition. Now I'd like to invite the reply speaker from side government to conclude this debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So this is a very messy and confusing debate. So I'm going to summarize it for all of y'all. So let's just put ourselves in both teams' shoes, okay? Firstly, I'm going to point out the best point from the opposition team and the best point from our side. And let me tell you why our best point is still better than the best point of the opposition team. Previously, we showed you that there is a big financial burden on the government to fund for the elderly. We are not denying them healthcare services. We are just simply not covering life-prolonging treatment for them. We are making the very hard choice to choose to fund someone with a higher life expectancy or someone with a lower life expectancy. And we would definitely prioritize someone with a higher life expectancy. In the opposition side, all they keep talking about is their value of life and everyone has a right to healthcare. And we're not denying that, and we're not demeaning anyone's values. Panels, what you have to realize is that in majority cases, elderly people have seen and lived their lives. Hence, most of them don't even have the mindset to recover during their last stages of life. Most of them just want to be at peace, and this house does not intend to bring anyone down or lower anyone's life's value. But when we look at this in a bigger scope, we have to choose between one. If you were put in a situation to save a kid's life who has a 60 to 70 years to live, or an elderly person who has 4 to 5 years to live, and someone who had already seen and lived through life, who would you choose? Hence, why we would like to stress on today's motion is which is that this house would not provide life-prolonging treatments to the elderly. We believe that if we choose to save someone who has a better and longer chance of living life, we would do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have reached the end of this debate session. We hope you had an excellent time watching the great speakers, and we'd also like to sincerely thank you for tuning in with us today. The results as well as the feedback will be announced shortly, so please stay tuned. Thank you and have a nice day.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back from the phenomenal debate sessions. Since we are closing in on the finals, we are witnessing more competitive participants, and the 5 previous debate sessions are great proof that we are going to witness something extraordinary in the finals.
Yes, I truly agree with you, Calvin. The way the speakers convey their messages with great accuracy, not to mention their poise and confidence too. And it is truly fascinating to see this characteristic in our participants.
Yes, and that is why we have debate competitions, to instill these values in our participants in hopes that it will help them in the near future. On that note, I have reasons to believe that the participants is waiting for their dinner break.
What reasons?
Because I'm hungry myself, and I'm sure you can hear my stomach growling.
Yes, I hear it, and I do not wish to hear it again. So let's have a dinner break immediately.
Once again, thank you to the audience for spending the precious time to join us in witnessing the proceedings of the competition. We are really grateful for your presence. We'll see you in 2 hours. Thank you, everyone.
Before you take your leave, please be reminded that we will be having an online talk at 9 p.m. later. If you're free, do join us. Your participation is greatly appreciated. Thank you, everyone. You may take your leave.